Good afternoon and good morning to those joining you out west. I'm Karen Langdon with the National Emergency Management Association. I'd like to welcome you to the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series. We're very excited to showcase the expertise of some of our members in this series, and today we're happy to present Communicating at the Speed of Mission to improve trust, transparency, and accountability. Thank you again for being with us today, and now it's my pleasure to pass the session to our moderator, Jamison Braun. Welcome, Jamison. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Karen, very much. And thank you to everybody from the National Emergency Management Association. We just came off the annual conference, and what better timing for us to continue the momentum that currently exists. As Karen mentioned, I'm Jamison Braun. I'm with an organization called Salesforce. But before that, before the last 3 years when I joined this company, I spent 30 years with the Department of State and the U.S. Department of Defense dealing with very similar instances as you did. So, Karen, if you jump to the next slide. So, first and foremost, I want to say that this is a thought leadership seminar and we are not selling any products. But as good lawyers for any company or any government have, we always do tell you that you have to base any decisions that you make on any type of capability on what is generally available. And next slide. Today we're really here to talk about several things, right? Karen mentioned the communicating at the speed of mission to improve this trust, transparency, and accountability in the emergency response framework. But I'd also argue that we're really here to talk about real life experiences in delivering real-time communication, breaking down information silos, and really the importance of mobile capability to deliver effect. And I've got an incredibly distinguished panel with me here today. You see their names on the screen, but I'm going to allow them to do their own introductions as we get started. So, Eric, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role, and then we'll jump to Ed and then to Grady.
Okay, great. My name is Eric Bishop. I am a solution engineer at Salesforce, meaning that it's my job to match the product set that Salesforce has to the need that our customers have. And in this case, I specifically focus on the Department of Defense and some of the things that we're doing with the Department of Defense around emergency response. I've been doing this for long enough that it's taken all my hair away to do all of these sales cycles and learning all this new technology, but it's great to see what's being used out there and the capabilities that we have this day and age. With that, I'll pass it on.
Okay, hey, thank you, Eric. Ed Westfall here, currently the Director of Business Development and Customer Success for the government technology team at Sikich LLC. But that's been the last year. Before that, I was with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services for several years, the final of which had been as the Deputy Director for Response Operations, so overseeing statewide response in across California, which, needless to say, is a little dynamic. Before my time with Cal OES, I had a 3+ decade career with the U.S. Coast Guard, serving operationally in the field, leading at the field level, and then at the end of the part of that career and the strategy and policy side of the house. So a lot of experience with not only frankly, the evolution and fielding of technology and what that means from an organizational perspective, but also with the kind of components of the personnel side of it and the organizational change side of it that goes into any sort of successful use of that technology as you roll it out. With that, I will hand it over to Grady.
Thanks, Ed. So Grady Joseph, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Disasters.io that specializes in technology-enabled disaster recovery. Prior to founding Disasters.io, began my emergency management career at FEMA headquarters, working for the Office of Response and Recovery on policy, operational challenges, and disaster-specific missions. From there, I went to FEMA Region 9, spent a few years there working on some major technology modernization efforts, and then had the opportunity to serve at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, where I led recovery operations for the state, and then finished my tenure there as the Assistant Director for Logistics Management, working closely with Mr. Westfall. Great to be with you all today. Thank you.
So as you can see, you've got a really distinguished panel with a collective, about 120 years of responding in this emergency response framework. And one of the things that I think that we've always seen is this importance of speed to communication. And sometimes in our government organizations, we often have this hierarchy that says that the person at the very top, the director, the cabinet secretary, the general, whoever it is, has to know everything. Where in reality, it's the frontline worker that really has to be the most well versed. So, and I'd like to kind of lead off with that idea of the speed to communication. Eric, kind of from you on a broad spectrum, first and foremost, how are you seeing things like that speed and flattening of communication come to fruition in different elements within your ecosystem?
So that's a good question. The things that come out over and over again is in order to have a good collaboration, you really have to engage with all of the stakeholders. You really have to deal with the internal folks and your external folks. So everything from your own emergency personnel to all the partner agencies. So FEMA works with state and local. They also work with the Department of Defense, with emergency preparedness liaison officers and things like that. And what we found is that you really need to be able to have a method of collaborating where everybody is involved. And so what that really means is that you're going to have to work with a particular event where all the people that are identified for that event can collaborate at the same time. So that'll mean that you'll need to be able to do a lot of collaboration on mobile devices as well as desktops, iPads, and things like that, because everybody's going to be out and about with mobile devices and things that are disconnected. Another thing you got to deal with is really you've got to also communicate on the channels of preference. So where is everybody? So if it's the general public, if you can text them, that's what they're looking at. If you can get to their social media accounts, that's where they're paying attention to. If you've got collaboration tools such as Slack or text messaging or certain websites, those all have to be what's involved so that you can get information back and forth between people. And so all of the notifications they're already used to looking for and looking at are where you're going to be able to collaborate with them. So I think the key for collaboration is to be where all of the stakeholders are so that they will be able to get this in a very, very timely fashion, in which case it's almost instantaneous. And everybody's got their own preferences for that. So ideally, when you are set up to engage, as much as possible, you could put your preferences into a profile or at least general public to be able to say, how is the general public going to respond most frequently or be able to see things most timely manner? Hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. Thanks. And, Edward, I think, I'd like to turn it over to you really from a macro perspective. I mean, what a distinguished career, 30 plus years with the U.S. Coast Guard, seeing things from the tactical to the strategic lens, and then becoming that deputy director for emergency services for the California governor's office. In that role, what kind of things are going through your mind as top of mind for making sure that you can get all the integrated partners to be able to communicate in real time at the speed of mission? What were your priorities and how did you kind of communicate with the staff and leverage resources to make them available? So at that speed of mission where both citizens' lives and liberty often depended on your speed.
No, thank you for that, Jamison. And frankly, I think it's building quite a bit upon Eric's point that really came down to meeting people where they are. And that's both in the literal sense and then from a communications perspective. Because depending upon the particular structure of the organization and each, in the United States, each state has their own specific kind of structures and dynamics that are unique to that state. But the general principle that you're operating from is that disasters begin and end locally, right? So there's this cascading build and then shrink that happens in terms of how the response and the recovery goes, and then obviously greatly simplifying that. One of the challenges that you have that we have at the statewide level is you never know what relatively localized incident is going to become that bigger incident. So number one, there's a broad situational awareness requirement that you have. And because, especially nowadays, between social media, I mean, you have this disparate, very broad-based set of ways that folks stay in, become informed and stay informed, that trying to manage all that in a way that you can understand what the source of truth is and to be able to articulate that both upward to, to either senior appointed or elected leadership, but also be able to share that as best you can across both the agencies that are at the state level, but then also to the county or the local government who are at the front line and the ones who, number one, are dealing with the crisis, but also need to know what's going on from their neighbor's perspective, need to understand what resources are en route, and then how do you communicate to those en route. So all of those different things are kind of going through your mind in terms of doing your best to level set the kind of the knowledge of the incident and help folks understand what's going on, to stay ahead of the rumor, to stay ahead of kind of unverified, sometimes valid but unverified information, and be able to very quickly track that down. We talked a lot about the importance of keeping the staff engaged, which is important for your organization, including like the public information officer and all them. Those shops have to know what's going on so they can rapidly respond as well. But then this very much matrix communication schema that you have to have, so that you're minimizing stovepipes, you're minimizing single channels, so that if I need my state level public information officer to be engaged with another agency's team over the local thing, whether through the joint information center, or if you haven't established it or not everybody's present, however that ends up happening, all of these tools become very important. And again, to Eric's point, there are so many different tools that the more you're able to kind of cross-pollinate, cross-communicate very easily across them is very important. But the other part of it that makes all of this succeed that much better is the groundwork, the relationship building, it's trite, but it's cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Don't exchange business cards the first time in the middle of the incident. There's always going to be new folks involved. That's just the nature of it, because every incident is unique, and especially, if depending on the nature of the incident, you will discover government agencies who have authority you never knew existed, who show up, and turns out they're the right player, and shame on you for not having figured that out ahead of time, but that's the nature of the business sometimes. But the more you can do those relationships, and the more you can do exercises, the more you can build upon all that, so that when you actually find yourself in the incident, you're not establishing. We talk about communicating the speed of mission that improves trust. Well, you lay the groundwork for that trust with those relationships built up front.
I love that, Ed. And internal to our own ecosystem, some of us have recently iterated on this idea of the sunny day conversation. And let's have those hard sunny day conversations before the rainy day ever happens. So I kind of want to pivot to Grady, right? Also an incredible background, multiple years with the Federal Emergency Management Association, and then pivots and works with Ed in the California Office of Emergency Services, both in logistics and in response operations. Grady, I'm wondering if you can kind of elaborate first and foremost, over your time with Cal OES, what was the big mission and what were some of the challenges that you were battling? But then also if you could allude to the collaboration medium that you were using with Ed's office to really make sure that you were discounting or kind of decreasing the amount of misinformation that you were getting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we dealt with a lot of challenges, right? So California it's a very geographically diverse state. We have some of the tallest mountain ranges. We've got low-lying areas, coastal regions, and the threats and the hazards are all different, right? And so during our tenure, we managed extreme wildfire, record-breaking wildfire seasons, lots of impacts to our mountainous communities and elsewhere, and then huge floods and COVID also was a huge, information exchange challenge. And so I think, when we first got to Cal OES, everything was done through the kind of standard communication channels that, many of you in the audience probably use, right? So emails, phone calls, text messages. You develop relationships with your counterparts in other, state agencies or with the locals. And those mediums of communication really drive some significant information silos, right? Because you're kind of playing the telephone game from the need out into the field through many different stakeholders, ultimately to decision makers and policy makers to make adjustments, bring resources to bear to support the needs of the community. And moving into a platform that really streamlines that communication and gives all the various stakeholders situational awareness on what's going on, even if they're not necessarily directly in the conversation. Being able to receive information directly from the field or directly from the entity that's experiencing a challenge or a shortfall is really critical to understanding what those next steps need to be and shrinking the amount of time that it takes to deconflict rumors and really understand ground truth and be able to action that. And so, as emergency managers, oftentimes we don't have a huge staff with a lot of capability. We rely on our partner agencies to be able to bring a lot of that capability to bear. And, in a big organization like the state of California or some of the various counties in the state, those information silos really come from the fact that we're all using we might all be on Microsoft 365, but everybody's got their own instance of Microsoft 365. And so that generates these huge, email threads that leave critical people off and all that sort of stuff. And so really being able to pull in all of your stakeholders, either ad hoc or through, standing, configurations allows you to more rapidly, receive the information that you need to make good decisions, disseminate the reasons for why certain things are happening or certain decisions are being made down to the team level and really collapse those information silos and making a pretty tall organization a lot closer to the folks at the ground who are really working the issues at large there. So I think making sure that you have those processes, procedures, and tools in place that really allow you to rapidly receive and disseminate information to all the different stakeholders that may be coming together and working together for the first time in a time of crisis, right? Because in our day-to-day worlds, right, we don't necessarily interact with all the agencies and different entities that may be experiencing a challenge or have resources that can bring to bear to support communities in their time of need.
So Ed, back to your level, kind of from the macro perspective, when we talk about planning as part of this sunny day function. So Grady highlighted really the importance of not being stuck in a single suite of capability, but being in a platform-based approach to reach across. So I'm wondering if you can talk about, further allude to the importance of kind of breaking down those silos across, the California departments and also the federal agencies, but also really the need for immediate tools to get in the hands of the tactical operator. Was that one of your concerns as the deputy director?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if I could have spent my sunny or even partly cloudy days, working on nonstop on the relationships at both my partner agencies at the state, to Grady's point, who have the capability. In a model, we're coordinating, but they're the ones who are bringing the hardware, right, and the staff, and the authorities, importantly, and as well as with my field staff and working with my field staff, coordinating with the county or meeting with the counties and understanding that. Because to Brady's point, you have a variety of different levels of staffing, and it doesn't always align with like the nature of the threat that particular jurisdiction has for all sorts of reasons. And so you need to understand those capabilities and limitations, because you'll have the converse where you'll have jurisdictions that are incredibly capable, and you need to make sure that that is well understood, so that you can lean on them, or you can encourage neighbor to neighbor cooperation, which is usually happening, but sometimes you need to facilitate it. As far as getting communications tools, into the hands of, communication and technology tools into the hands of the front line. I mean, on one hand, obviously, that is not necessarily the immediate responsibility at the state level. But depending upon the structure of the state, in the state of California, the communications backbone statewide is part of the Cal OES responsibility. So the tools that connect all those folks, and the tools that enable mutual aid responders from counties in the southern part of the state to be supporting, in the other end of the state, not even withstanding, deploying outside of the state when needed, are all part of those things that working internal with OES, but with the director that actually was in the logistics directorate that owned that communications backbone was really important. And then having those communication, having the relationships with your field teams, and then with the counties and local jurisdictions, to make sure that they're a part of the conversation of upgrades to that technology. Make sure that, the simple things, communications tests, all those things are happening, so that we know that the system works. You and I both, with our backgrounds and the military side of the house, know the importance of that, because first thing to go out the window is communication. And so when you can be confident either in your communications or backups, how that can work together, so that the coordination can happen amongst all the different jurisdictions and the different levels of jurisdictions. Incredibly.
And Grady, I want to direct this one back to you, because I think I read in one of your articles, when you guys were doing the virus operation, that you connected with 260 fire departments, 31 emergency operation centers, 15 police departments, and 9 federal and state agencies. And at the speed of mission, while you're trying to save people's homes and national preserve forest lands and things like this, can you kind of expound upon what Ed was talking about, and talk about some of the challenges of the current tool set that was given to those first responders, and how you kind of navigated this new collaboration platform to make those solutions a lot better and a lot more expedient for the taxpayer?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who are not aware, the FIRUS program at State of California is 2 King Air aircraft equipped with infrared sensors, full motion video, and synthetic aperture radar. And the primary purpose of those, they're 24/7, 365 capability in Northern California and Southern California. And that's really a rapid response intel platform. So we got a fire start, they'll activate FIRUS, they'll go fly the perimeter, and they'll provide back to first responders on the ground, and situational awareness back to the emergency operations centers what that fire perimeter looks like. Our partners at UC San Diego do spread modeling against that data, so that we understand, based on the conditions on the ground, where that fire is likely to move, so that we can understand evacuation requirements, critical infrastructure impacts, things of that nature. When that platform, which was started in a joint venture with Orange County Fire Authority and Los Angeles Fire Department, first came to the state as the primary sponsor, we were sharing all this information across this diverse group of stakeholders through WhatsApp. And there was a number of challenges with that. First and foremost, security and information security. Who has access to that information? How are we managing the folks who are being added to a WhatsApp thread? And how do we make sure that the right folks need it, and that information is not getting into the hands of individuals who could either do bad things with it, or might read into some pre-decisional data and operational data, something that is inconsistent with the kind of messaging that the governmental organizations want to make sure that it's getting out to the population in a controlled way. And so moving into the Slack platform really enabled the state to not only increase the collaboration with all the stakeholders, ensure that we had the right permission sets and information security along that intelligence, but also increase the ability to share rich data, right? So these are KMZ files that are coming out of there, so making sure that that can get over the GIS teams so that they can use those into their situational aware products and intelligence products, out to the public information officers to communicate with the communities that are being impacted. Really, really important. And so by having this platform to be able to disseminate that information in a controlled manner, but also maintain the richness of the content coming through there, because it's fire perimeters, it's full motion video clips that are audio narrated based on what the pilots and the intel chief on the ship is seeing on the ground. Being able to make sure that all that is being communicated effectively and efficiently to everybody who needs to know it. Follow-on missions can be tasked. That's a really critical communication component. Making sure that we don't have a silo, but it's also not just freely available out there for anybody and everybody who might not have the same goals of helping the communities that the folks on the ground do.
No, it's great, Grady. And you mentioned, the platform Slack, which is an acronym, interestingly enough. So for the searchable log of all conversational knowledge of the organization, I can only imagine how that would speed up the onboarding. So for new personnel that are coming in, especially the external agencies who are new to the fight, so to speak, so that they could immediately get spun up. So to the event without having to spend a lot of time kind of doing the research and the history. So not only that, but I can imagine there'd be a massive effect, especially for the federal agencies, as you do your lessons learned on the back end. I want to pivot for a second, though, to Eric, because Grady, you mentioned this on accountability and traceability and communication. So, and I kind of want to highlight, Eric, for you and your world, seeing across things like intelligence operations and security, development operations and things like that. How important is this traceability and accountability for setting up our government organizations for success?
Obviously, it's critical. I mean, one of the things I start with on all of this is think about the experience that you would want to have if you were in each of these roles. So put on your emergency management hat, put on your public citizen hat. Say, what would your experience want to be? Because if I'm asking for accountability, if I'm asking for the staff to do the job and the role that they're in, you really need to make it fast and efficient to do that. So the best way to get somebody to be accountable for both engaging in the event, but also for the citizens to respond to events and your outreach is to make it easy to do that. So from the perspective of even planning an event, how do I identify things like an audience that might have to be accountable? Can I inscribe a polygon on a map? Can I make it easy for an event planner or an emergency planner to just pick the polygon that we're already getting from Esri? Here's the cone of the hurricane, or here's the area of effect that we get from a third party that is the wildfire affected area. And then I can just click a button and send out communication to the people that might be affected. And for the accountability, what we really want it to be is easy and seamless to respond as well. So we want to do bulk outbound communications, again, with a single push of the button, with whatever kind of accountability and approval before you do all that. But you want to make it easy for those responses to come back in. So you want all those interactions to be tracked and logged for the accountability. And then as necessary, when people respond, potentially to take action. So if somebody needs assistance, what we need to do is take that response and put automation around it to create a case for help. And so what is your process in the organization to take that response and do something with it? So if your system can perform those sorts of policy enforcement, escalations, and things like that to create cases, then that really helps. And then you also can do smart escalation. So if somebody doesn't respond to the initial outreach, hey, tell me if you're okay. In the case, like especially in the Department of Defense, and you worked with this, Jamison, before, is you have to respond. And if you don't, then we're going to start going up the hierarchy of the management chain until you do respond. And nobody wants their boss to be notified that you did not pay attention to the initial notification. So you have to have your processes and policies in place to do that. And of course, once you have all of that, we can report on any of this. So we can report on the effectiveness of that outreach. We can look at the response rates. We can audit our processes and do reporting on that, because we can track all of the work that everybody does, from the initial creation of an event saying, hey, we got a wildfire coming. We've got a hurricane coming. We have a tornado track. All of that, you need to be able to report on it so you can do after action reports and be able to see if you're following your own best practices. And then I also want to follow up with what Grady said, how important security is on this. And so when you're doing any of this, you really have to control who has access to information, who has access on a day-to-day event information, who has authority to promote things, to change things. But also, if you have people responding back, you've got private and health-related information. So you also have to keep track of all of that. And so the security for all this accountability and all of this feedback where we escalate to a case to provide service to citizens, that's all got to be part and parcel to how you set up your system so that you can do this accountability and protect the information you get when somebody responds.
You know, I'm thinking back to my old training days where one of my instructors once said, train hard and fight easy. And each one of you are now in a senior position for advanced planning. And I kind of want to ask this question first to Ed, is for you, how important is making sure that we've got the right players in this sunny day account kind of pre-positioned in the form of resources and capabilities ahead of time before incidents ever arrive?
Oh, I mean, that's essential. I mean, to the point actually that Eric was making there about PII and information security policies. This is something that you really have to think through when you're building those relationships and when you're doing the exercises and when you're doing that. Is that if you have kind of peer level jurisdictions, like in this case, I'm thinking like state to state. Each state may have its own peculiarities about information security requirements, what's allowable on a platform, all those different things, and you have to resolve those or at least understand where those differences exist and who has the right authorities within those respective governments to overcome, to either, in an ideal world, overcome them ahead of time through agreements and documentation, but if nothing else, at least know who to go through to resolve it very quickly. Internal to a state, but at different county level, to various different counties, usually that dynamic is a little bit less. It will not so much be a statutory limitation, but more of a policy issue. But the same dynamic is true, that you've got to get those conversations going with the folks who own those policies, so that you can overcome them, ahead of the crisis. And that goes back to the point of having the right people. It's one of those things when you build out the list of participants in exercises or in the conversations and relationship building. It's very easy to make the list can become exponentially growth, right? Because so all these different points we're making, and so it is important to have a planning function that focuses kind of on the individual issues, so that you don't overwhelm yourself with all the relationships and all the problems you're trying to address at once. You need to be thinking that way, and frankly, you need to accept the fact that there will always be things that pop up that either something evolved, somebody didn't get the word, or frankly, they had the particular incident that unfolds was one who you hadn't quite imagined yet, right? But if you can solve, the 85% of the problem, so that the hard stuff on the 15, okay, then that's what will work. But yes, having all those key players involved and being aware of those dynamics, because these are the issues that you encounter in the midst of it, that everybody looks at everybody else and says, oh my gosh, how can this be the problem? But it is. it was actually an international emergency management exercise I participated on with a number of Arctic nations, and it involved like different ships embarking survivors from things, and who was going to have the system of record of keeping track of their vital information, and how was that going to get shared with another nation, and the dynamics were that was actually the biggest sticking point in lessons learned from the exercise was the information and PII sharing dynamics between nations there. So and I always have that one in my mind whenever you're dealing with this, even internal to the U.S. These are just policy issues that come up, and you want to address them up front so that you're maximizing the capability of the technology that you're bringing, which from a sheer capability can do all sorts of things, but policy and law have to be addressed in terms of doing it, because that'll shut things down at least for a moment, and that's not when you need to have that happen.
I think, Ed, I also, heard what you kind of underlaid in your context, which was the importance of resilience. So, and how important that is. I kind of over to Grady, one of the other things I remember learning a long time ago is, no plan survives first contact. So, and it could be, right, a ship that crashes into a bridge that decimates a fiber optic cable that affects the National Weather Service being able to communicate. It could be the recent hurricanes, right, where Elon Musk and his team are drop shipping Starlink. So I wonder if you could allude as we start to close out this fantastic webinar on the importance of this mobile capability in the form of not only creating resilience and a collaboration tool, but also its impact on the future workforce of these younger and younger generations coming in.
Absolutely. So having mobile applications and tools to be able to communicate over the internet are incredibly important. But we spend a lot of time thinking about what happens when those tools go away, right? So if we're reliant on a fiber optic network, a cellular network, things of that nature, right? And as we've all seen in the recent disasters, those are often the first things to go. It's an incredibly fragile set of infrastructure. You have radio backbones that can continue to work, but you really are limited to voice only. And this day and age, it's so important to have rich data coming out of these disasters and getting into these disaster areas. And so, the growth and the success that companies like Starlink have had, really providing broadband capability through satellite is, functionally a game changer for us in emergency management and for resilient and redundant communications. Because first and foremost, you've got to be able to get information in and get information out, regardless of the platform that you're using to do that. And so really thinking through, what does your redundancy strategy look like? We saw thousands of Starlink terminals being deployed into North Carolina following Helena, and quite frankly, that's the wrong time to be doing it, right? You really want to set up that redundancy to the extent that you possibly can ahead of time. A lot of these solutions are coming down in cost in a very, very dramatic way. Before, having a sat phone in your EOC, every phone call was, a couple bucks a minute. And we're really seeing the economies of scale from that capability coming down substantially and bringing even better capability. If anybody's ever worked on an event where you had a cow on wheels, cell on wheels deployed, or FirstNet, and they're running that off of their satellite backbone because fiber's been cut or degraded, how that's really like an information straw. You're going to get a text message through, you're going to get maybe a phone call through when those types of capabilities come to town. But having capabilities like a Starlink or OneWeb is also doing some things in this area is really critical to making sure that your tools stay up and you can continue to receive and distribute that rich communication, that data. And it's really critical for the younger generation, right? We've got a mix of generations in the workforce today. And the younger folks were born, they don't know anything but having smartphones. And real-time access to their Twitter feeds and all this information coming around. And when that is kind of removed, they don't necessarily know how to operate in a paper-based world, or a world that doesn't have access to easy navigation tools and things of that nature. And so we would do technology modernization initiatives, and one of the main things that came out was, well, does this have offline capability? We have to be able to operate offline. And in the last 2 to 4 years, the conversation has really shifted to, instead of being able to operate in an offline environment, how do we ensure that we're always online, right? What strategies do we need to put in place? What capabilities do we need to have to ensure that when the terrestrial network goes down or is impacted or degraded, we can fall back to some of these other satellite-based platforms that aren't reliant on that fragile infrastructure, and ensure that rich data and rich communication capabilities continue to come into the impacted area for situational awareness and out, so that we can best serve the needs of survivors.
I love it. I think we've learned across the board today, data is the new currency, and being able to exchange that in a real-time fashion is super important. On behalf of the organization NEMA, on behalf of Salesforce, on behalf of our speakers, for all of our participants on the line, I really just want to say thank you for continuing to fight for taking care of our citizens and providing safe harbors, and really setting up the conditions for where we need to be. We've got a few minutes that we can place some things in the Q&A if you like. If not, I would ask you to please continue to reach out to each and every one of us. You've got this distinguished panel of individuals. Hopefully, we've been able to communicate to you today in the emergency response framework, the importance of real-time communication, breaking down those information silos, and the importance of mobile capabilities, especially in field operations. I thank each and every one of you. Karen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jamison. I really appreciate you being with us today. And thank you to all of our speakers. I'm not seeing anything any questions in the chat feature. If you wish to email me after the fact, you're more than welcome to do that, and I'll share that with all of the presenters today and get your questions answered for you. Thank you to Salesforce for sponsoring today's session, and specifically Jamison, Eric, Ed, and Grady for sharing your expertise with us. Thanks also to our great audience for participating. You can find out more about the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series and how to sponsor one of your own on the NEMA website, www.nemaweb.org, in the resources section. As a reminder, there'll be a short survey coming to you via email, and we would appreciate your feedback. The webinar recording will be available on the NEMA YouTube channel, NEMA for You, in just a few weeks. Thank you again for attending. Take care, stay well, and have a productive rest of your day. Bye-bye.